Uh, Between the exam and the day off last week, it's been over a week since I saw you last. We're working on grading the exams, and we'll get get them back to you soon. I don't know if Maggie, you want to say anything about the exam return or not yet?
I'll just say that you'll certainly get them back by early next week.
All right, so we'll get those finalized and back to the students. Okay, in this particular set of lectures, 4 lectures, or 3 plus 1, I'm going to be talking to you about a topic near and dear to my heart that is a central focus of the work of my laboratory. And in particular, I'm going to be talking to you about real social networks, not so much the online variety, although I have a few things to say about that as well. These are the kinds of networks I'm interested in are the face-to-face, the real networks that we make and that humans and our ancestors have been embedded in for hundreds of thousands of years. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how to use social networks and insights about them to make the world better. Now, my own interest in this topic began over 20 years ago. As I have periodically alluded to during this class, I'm a hospice doctor. I still am, but I used to practice hospice medicine. And I used to care for terminally ill patients, primarily at home, although also in hospital settings. And in that capacity, I would often typically meet their families. And I was observing how the serious illness of the patient was affecting, those around them, everyone in their family. And in my lab at the time, this was over 25 years ago, I was studying the widowhood effect, which we discussed last time before we took the break, which is, this idea of dying of a broken heart, or the idea that recently bereaved people who've lost their spouse have an increased risk of death. Like this couple, for example. This man is terminally ill with a brain tumor, and that's his wife. And you can again see the love in this couple's eyes. And one day, this is sort of the origin story of my interest in networks. It's a true story. At the time, I was taking care of people who were dying in the south side of Chicago, a primarily poor African-American part of our country. And I was visiting a woman who was dying of dementia, and she was being tended for by her daughter. And the daughter was completely exhausted from her mother's long, serious, and now terminal illness. And the daughter's husband had become sick, in the setting of his wife being exhausted for caring for her mother. And the husband's friend was depressed about the husband's sickness. And in those days, we had these old cell phones that were literally the size and shape of bricks. I'm not kidding you. And this was a very cool thing to have. And I had one because, I had an important job as a doctor, visiting patients. It's not like nowadays, you get that anyone has cell phones. And I was driving home that particular afternoon, and the phone rings, and it's the husband's friend who is calling me because he's depressed about what has happened to his friend, who is the husband of the daughter, who is the daughter of the woman who's dying of dementia. And so here's this random guy calling me. And so I suddenly realized, literally in the car as I was driving home from the south side of Chicago to where I lived, 2 very simple things. First, that this widowhood effect is not limited to husbands and wives. And second, that it wasn't even limited to pairs of people. There could be a kind of non-biological spread of physical and mental illness rippling through the network from one person to another, to another, to another. And so I came to see the world in what was, for me, a completely new way. Other people had seen it this way before, but for me, this was a new way. And so here you can imagine we have the mother-daughter pair, and here's the chain of 4 people that I described to, and now there are other pairs nearby. And all these people and many more are connected to each other because of ties of marriage and friendship and work and family. And I realized that pairs of people and the effect that they had on each other are in fact a special case of a much larger phenomenon having to do with human connections and influence within social networks. And these networks are truly vast. We humans have evolved to make this ornate, elaborate structures, these networks, and we live out our lives embedded in particular locations within these networks. And to my eye, and as I began to think about these things, and I had some training in network science as part of my PhD in sociology, and as I had these incipient ideas about, look, the world is organized in this way, and I hadn't really appreciated before, and oh my goodness, there's so many deep questions we could ask. I just became obsessed with this topic, completely obsessed. And it seemed to me in that moment that there were so many directions that this topic could go. And not only did I have this sense that this was an important topic, important to the world, and also important to me and my own scientific interests, but I also had the sense that this topic would be useful, could be used actually to make innovations that might actually be applied to the clinical care of patients or to public health interventions. Now, to my eye, these social networks are intricate things of beauty. And they are so elaborate and so complex and so ubiquitous, in fact, that one has to wonder, what purpose do they serve? I mean, why are we embedded in networks? How do they form? How do they work? And how do they affect us? I'm going to be spending 3 lectures with you on this because understanding social networks is a key part of all of social science, not just sociology, not just public health, but all of social science. And as I will lay out over the coming 2 lectures, a deeper understanding of human social interaction provides us with a whole suite of tools to also intervene in human populations in meaningful ways with respect to public health. Now, first of all, what's the difference between a group and a network? We might define a group by its attributes. For example, we might say Yaleys, that would be a group, or scuba divers, that might be a group, or Red Sox fans, that might be a group, or women, that might be a group, for example. Or we might define it by its location. You know, those people waiting in line over there to get into the theater, for instance, would be a group of people. And so you can imagine here, every dot is a person, and there's 100 dots here, and this is some group of people, for example. But the difference is that a network has ties. It has the ties between people, and specific ties at that. And there are 2 kinds of networks, artificial networks and natural networks. This is the simplest kind of artificial network you can imagine, a simple linear network. You take those 100 people and you add 99 connections among them, and you make a linear network. Everyone is connected to the person on the left and the person on the right. And this network, this artificial network, is now optimized for the transportation of water, for example, to put out a fire, or debris, for example, to clean up after a calamity. Or you might take the same 100 people and the same number of ties, 99 ties, and organize them differently in the form of this old-fashioned technology known as a telephone tree. When I was your age, or actually when I was in elementary school, if a principal wanted to close a school, for example, due to a snow day, the procedure was that the principal would call one parent on the list in a grade, or for example, and each parent would in turn have to have the phone numbers of 2 other parents they were supposed to call. And the principal would say, the school is closed today. And then the information would spread rapidly through the network. Every parent calling 2 parents, rather than the principal having to take a lot of time to call all 100 parents. But the point is, this network here also has 100 people, also has 99 ties, but it has a completely different topology, a completely different architecture. And this new architecture, this new topology given to this population, endows it with properties that were different than the properties of the 100 people arranged in the linear graph. So the structure of the network into which we organize human beings can have consequences for the kinds of abilities that that group has, the kind of properties that it manifests. This is a deep idea that I'll return to a couple of times in the next couple of weeks, more than a couple of times probably. Or we could take the same 100 people and now a different number of ties. This is actually 450 ties, and we can organize them in the form of a military company, 10 squads of 10 men, let's say. So each of these 10 men is connected to all the other men within their squad, but there are no connections between the squads. So it's actually 10 times 9 divided by 2, 45 connections in each of these, times 10, 450 connections now. So more than the 99 connections we had before. And this organization of human beings can take a group of strangers and by organizing them in this fashion, elicit from them a property they did not previously have. For example, a willingness to die for each other. Just like organizing them can provide them with a property to put out a fire better, organizing them in this topology can endow this group with, again, a different set of properties, optimizing them for the performance of a different set of tasks. But real social networks differ in shape and appearance, and nowadays typically in size. This is a real social network. Every dot is a person. Every line between them is some kind of a relationship between them. And you can see that this has a kind of beautiful, ornate, rather different structure than the artificial networks that I just showed you. And my laboratory began to study these networks in earnest in 2002. And this is a slide of one of our earliest networks, one of our first studies. And this image helped us to understand the role of social networks in obesity, as shown in the paper, I'm pretty sure, that was assigned to you in your readings today. Now, as we've seen already in the class, the prevalence of obesity has increased dramatically in our society from over 25% to 35% or so over the past decade. And over 66% of Americans are now clinically overweight or obese. And even when I became interested in this topic 20 years ago now, numerous explanations for the obesity epidemic were already being advanced. For example, the declining real price of food. Food is getting objectively cheaper and cheaper, and by the law of supply and demand, we're going to buy more of it and therefore get bigger. Or by the design of our cities that contributes to more sedentary lifestyles, for example, and on and on, many of the explanations that we've already discussed in the class. But we wondered whether we could add an explanation to the list. It was already trendy to speak of the obesity epidemic. And obesity was clearly epidemic in one meaning of the word, which is that there was more of it than there used to be before. There was a spike in obesity. But we wondered whether it was could be seen as epidemic in another meaning of the word. Could we find evidence for a contagion, for a kind of spread in obesity, a person-to-person spread? And to the extent that obesity is a product of personal choices and voluntary behaviors, the fact that people are embedded in social networks and are understandably influenced by the appearance and behaviors of those around them suggested to us that weight gain in one individual should influence weight gain in others. But we needed a very special kind of data to study this, which did not exist at the time. There's a whole story of how we stumbled on and were able to computerize a set of data that had been in archives that was unused, but we were able to map the networks that were previously hidden among this population. And we did that using the Framingham Heart Study. And these are 2,200 people drawn from the Framingham Heart Study in 2000. The Framingham Heart Study is a longitudinal cohort study that was begun after the Second World War in the time of Framingham, Massachusetts, when subsequent generations of residents of the town are impaneled into a cohorts and are then followed prospectively every 4 years or so, coming in to be weighed and examined. And it was trying to identify risk factors for cardiac disease, but we use the data for something else. So here, every dot's a person, every line is a relationship. And now we make the dot size proportional to people's body mass index. So bigger dots are bigger people. In addition, we color the dots yellow if that person's BMI is above 30, if they're properly obese. And if you look at this image, you might be able to see evidence of clusters of obese and non-obese individuals near each other within the network. Maybe if you squint, it'll look like there's a coalescence of yellow and red dots in a kind of patchy fashion. And now as I'm talking about this, Maggie, it's occurring to me we could use that same procedure you use in the geographic studies, Moran's eye, right? And I don't know if that's ever been applied to networks. We should actually look at that. Would you make a note of that? So there's clustering within the networks in these attributes. But several questions are raised by this clustering. First of all, how much clustering is there? Second, is there more clustering than simply due to chance? Third, how big are the clusters? And fourth, and most interestingly, what might cause the clusters? So one way of discerning the extent of clustering is to use within a network is the following technique. And we didn't invent this technique, but we applied it in a kind of an inventive way. So imagine that you have a network. And so here's a network of individuals. And you pick a single individual and you start working out from them. Now imagine that 40% of the population is obese, 40%. And so here is this person, you find an obese person, and you look at the people 1 degree removed from them. And in expectation, if 40% of the people are obese, 2 of 5 people at 1 degree of separation from this person would be obese. And if you go to 2 degrees of separation, and let's say there are 15 people in that layer of the onion, in expectation, 6 of 15 people, 40% would be obese. And if you got to 3 degrees of separation, and let's say there were 25 people there, 10 of 25 or 40% would be obese. So the yellow dots are obese, the red dots are non-obese. You pick an obese person, and if in fact obesity is randomly distributed through the network, every degree of separation from an obese person, in expectation, on average, typically, for most people in the network, if you averaged across, at every degree of separation, there would be 40% of people would be obese if there was no clustering. On the other hand, if there were clustering of obese people, you would find a different pattern. Let's say you pick an obese individual, you might find that actually 1 degree removed from them, 3 of 5 or 60% of the people are obese. And at 2 degrees removed, 7 of 15 or about 50% would be obese. And then when you got out to 3 degrees of separation, 8 of 25 or 32% approximately would be obese. So you would have these peaks and these valleys within the network of a little peak of obese individuals. And as you fell away from them, you would get into the valleys where you would have the non-obese individuals. This is what the clustering would look like. And there's a way to do something known as a topological permutation test, where you test this idea, and you can develop a mathematical summary as a result of the extent of clustering and the size of the clusters. And so that is what we did. And we got results of this kind. This shows the increase in probability that a person is obese, given that a social contact of theirs is obese, according to the degrees of separation. And what this slide says is that if you are obese, your friends have a 40% chance of being obese. And your friends' friends have a 25% chance of being obese. And your friends' have a 10% chance of being obese. It's only when I get to your friends' that there's no longer a relationship between that person's body size and your body size. So if I knew nothing else about you than that your friends, someone you almost certainly do not know, is obese, I would be better than chance able to predict your body size. So this slide shows us 2 different things. First of all, it shows us that there's more clustering than due to chance in the network. And second, it shows that the diameter of these, the radius of these clusters is to 3 degrees of separation. There's a relationship between your body size and the body size of your friends, and your friends, and only at a certain geodesic distance. Geodesic is degrees of separation. It's a distance through the network. Only at a certain geodesic distance of 4 is there no longer a relationship between that person's body size and your body size. But this analysis does not tell us the cause of the clusters. And there are at least three possible explanations. The first idea is induction, or social contagion, or like a social domino effect or social influence. Here the idea is that as I gain weight, it makes Maggie gain weight. As Maggie gains weight, it makes Nick gain weight. As Nick gains weight, it makes the next person gain weight, and weight gain propagates through the system. That's induction. Another possibility is homophily. Here the idea is not that my weight gain causes Maggie's weight gain, but rather that Maggie and I preferentially form an attachment because we have a similar body size or similar exercise or food habits to begin with, okay? This is called homophily, or birds of a feather flock together, all right? So it's not that my weight gain causes her weight gain, but rather we have a similar body size and we connect to each other preferentially at the first place. A third possibility is that it's neither my weight gain causing her weight gain nor us forming an attachment because we have similar body size or behavior, but rather that we share a common exposure to a particular context, like a gym that makes us both lose weight, or a fast food joint that makes us both gain weight at the same time. Now, all three of these are typically present in any social process. You know, why are you studious? Are you studious because your friends are studious? Do the studious students preferentially form attachments to each other? Or are you being influenced by a charismatic teacher that makes you all want to be studious at the same time? Why do you use drugs? Is it because your friends are using drugs? Is it because drug users hang out with each other? Or is there a neighborhood pusher or some kind of neighborhood effect that's causing everyone in this community to use drugs at the same time? So all three of these are typically present in any social phenomenon, and it takes effort to tease them apart. And we ourselves and others since then have used a variety of strategies to sort this out. So, for example, this is a real photograph of a real college dorm room. I'm not making this up. This is an undoctored picture that I conspired with one of my students as I was talking with him about this to photograph his room because he was talking about his roommate. So the question is, and believe it or not, it's a very small room and the two roommates are sleeping side by side. This bed has been dispersed. And so there's like a little carpet of clothing between the beds here. And so the question is, did one roommate's lack of tidiness affect the others? Is that why the room is a mess? Or did they decide to become roommates because they had similarly low standards of cleanliness? Or was there some other exogenous event that caused both of them to act in this ridiculous way, such as the small dorm rooms in old campus, or the lax standards of the college heads, that lead to them behaving in this way at the same time. And unless you think this is a temporary state of affairs, this is a picture of the room 2 weeks later. So I had a student, he showed me this photograph, I couldn't believe it. And he goes, no, it hasn't changed. Actually, if you look carefully, you see it has changed. There's more piles of laundry. This is when I was still teaching at Harvard, so you can't really blame the Yale students. The water bottle has the sun's tanning lotion has moved and is now replaced by a water bottle. The books do not appear to have been touched. The students do not appear to have studied. And the beds, do appear to have been slept in. So the students, are using their room as students are wont to do. Or what do you think is going on here with these two people? This person is a very famous sociologist now at Stanford University. Do you think the crazy attire spread from one of them to another? Or did they form this union because they both liked the color purple? Or was there some other exogenous event, like a sporting competition, that made them both act in this ridiculous fashion? And in fact, the longitudinality in our data is very helpful in tracing the roles of homophily versus induction. And so what we can do here is we can trace out the prevalence of obesity over time and the social relationships could change over time, and the levels of obesity could change over time. And if we can follow out the sequence of relationships and obesity change, we might better be able to tell which comes first. Is it my weight gain that, and then subsequently we see Maggie, I gain weight in one time period, and then later on we see that Maggie gains weight in a subsequent time period, or do we see that I then form a connection? Maggie and I were unconnected, we have a similar body size, and therefore we form a connection. So having information across time lets us tease that out a little bit. Now, when I began this research project, at the time I was and I still do, I was borrowing a lot of metaphors from physics. And I had in mind the kind of experiments some of us did in high school. Maybe you remember this experiment where you have a water table and you have an apparatus and you can drop something from a particular height in the apparatus, maybe repeatedly. And if you set it up just right, like drop a pebble into the water, you get these ripples, and the ripples fan out from the pebble, hit the perimeter of the table and bounce back. And if you do it just right, you can get a kind of standing wave in the water surface with peaks and valleys within the surface. So we wondered whether we could see sort of waves of obesity in the social fabric. You can think of social networks as a hyperdimensional surface. And so the question is, if one person gained weight, could we see a wave of obesity spreading out from that person, affecting other people? Now, this little video that I'm about to show you took 5 years of my life and over $1 million to make. And it was one of the most exciting and most depressing moments of my scientific career. So once again, every dot is a person. Every line between people is a relationship. Bigger dots are bigger people. We color them yellow if they are obese. And here we have only two kinds of relationships. The purple dots show spousal relationships, and the gray dots show friendship relationships. Let me just double check. I can't remember right now which color indicates which. It's not crucial. But the point is, we only have genetically unrelated individuals here. People are only connected through non-genetic ties, friendship or spousal ties. So now we're going to put this network into motion, and we're going to see what happens every single day. So every day we're going to take a snapshot of the network. We don't observe the network every day, but on any given day that a person is weighed, and this happens roughly every 4 years, you're going to see the dots get bigger or smaller according to what happens to their weight. And on any given day that we observe a change in relationship status, for example, a couple gets married or divorced, or they friend each other or defriend each other. This is the real old-fashioned defriending, a real face-to-face defriending, not a kind of Facebook, or Instagram defriending. And so you're going to see this network change. And mostly you're going to see a sea of yellow, because this 32-year period that I'm going to show you includes the period of the obesity epidemic. Here we go, starting in 1971. And the question is, can you see a wave of obesity in this network? Here, if you look at this woman in the middle, in a moment, she's going to gain a ton of weight. The red perimeter dots are women, and the blue perimeter dots, there she goes. She's gaining a ton of weight, and she moves to the center of the network, kind of causing obesity everywhere around her, I think. So now you can just see this wave of obesity. We're in 1998. This is the peak of the United States, the inflection, and the relationships are changing across time. Well, when I looked at this image, I can't tell you, it took us 2 years to get the funding for this project, and 2 years to build the data set for the project, and a year to get the statistical software to work. This was like 15 years ago now, and another 6 months to get the video software to work, to render these networks in videos. And this is one of the first videos ever made of a longitudinally evolving network that had the kind of this size, that had the kind of visualization that I'm showing you. And I was convinced when we began the project that I would be able to visualize these waves of obesity. And when I saw this image, and this is the same image I first saw myself, whatever it was, 15 years ago now, I didn't see the wave. And so I was so depressed. And it took me and my colleague, James Fowler, with whom I did all this work, a whole day to figure out what the flaw in our thinking was. And eventually we figured this out. Now, if I was in a classroom setting with you where I could see your eyes, I would ask you to offer some ideas. And usually in a classroom of 100 or 200 people, there's one person who raises their hand and has figured out why the waves are not visible. But the answer is that obesity is not a unicentric epidemic. It's a multicentric epidemic. There's not a single hand dropping a single pebble on the surface of the water, causing these waves that then are easy to see. A whole handful of rocks has been thrown onto the surface at the same time. And every rock, plunk, 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 falling into the water causes these ripples, but the ripples interfere with each other, just like you learned in physics. You have wave interference, or if you didn't take physics, you may have seen boats coming into a port. And you know that if a single boat comes into the port, you can see the wake behind the boat. But if multiple boats come in, the wakes crisscross each other and you get a choppy surface on the water. So we have choppy surface on this hyperdimensional surface that is a network. So a completely different set of statistical tools would be needed and was needed, and we did implement to try to understand, could we back out and see evidence for a contagion in obesity for these waves, despite the fact that we couldn't see them in the visualization. And so we began to use a variety of such techniques to study these, and the other thing that happened when I made this network is that with this kind of perspective, I began to see human groups and human society differently. This network moves, things flow within it. It changes and evolves. It's resilient to injury. People die within the network, but the network endures. It has a memory. It has a coherence and an endurance across time. And this, because of all of these qualities, I came to see social networks as living things, as kind of ant colonies of human beings, the analogy to ant colonies. And this totally changed my perspective on so many phenomena within my field, but within the world, the natural world in general. And so, as I said, we used a variety of tricks to begin to study these things. And one of the tricks was to exploit the directionality of friendship. So let me ask you, let me see if I can quit out of this for a moment. It might be worth quitting out so I can see your faces. Let me just see here. Escape. Oh no, I didn't need to stop share. There we go. Okay, let me ask you, you're going to have a pair of people, let's say me and Maggie. I'm going to be the ego, and Maggie's the alter. Okay, this is technical network language, the ego-alter pairs. Okay, now there are three possibilities in this situation. One is that I nominate Maggie as my friend, and Maggie reciprocates the nomination, and she says I am her friend. That's called a reciprocal friendship. Okay. Another possibility is that I nominate Maggie as my friend, and she has no idea who I am. That was my experience in high school. I thought all these people were my friend, and they had no idea who I was. Okay, that's an ego-nominated friendship. And last, Maggie nominates me as her friend, and I do not know who she is. This is different than the previous thing I said, even though it sounds the same. That's an alter-nominated friendship. Now, from this perspective, in which of those three situations do you think that Maggie's weight gain will be most likely to cause my weight gain? Which of those three? Raise your hands. Somebody. I refuse to lull you into a false sense of pliancy. I'm going to demand that you that you speak up. Yes, Lauren. In which of those three do you think Maggie's weight gain would be most likely to cause my weight gain?
I would say reciprocal, because I think if you both sort of esteem each other and respect each other, you might be more likely to influence each other.
Yes.
And between that and ego-nominated as well.
Yeah, that's exactly the right intuition, that if I nominate Maggie and she nominates me, That should be an intimate, closer friendship. I should respect Maggie. She respects me. If Maggie's gaining weight, I might notice that weight gain, or I might think, hey, it's okay to gain weight. Maggie gained weight. Why can't I gain weight? And so on. Very good. Which is next? In the most likely situation that Maggie's weight gain would affect my weight gain, which of the remaining two types of relationships? Someone else.
Ego nominated?
Ego nominated. Yes, that's right. I nominate Maggie as my friend. I'm paying attention to Maggie. I'm aware of Maggie. And so her weight gain might affect me. And last, if at all, alter nominated friendship. In this situation, Maggie says I'm her friend. She starts gaining weight. I have no idea who she is. I'm not paying attention to Maggie. She's not my friend. Therefore, her weight gain doesn't affect me at all. That's exactly right. But the important insight here is that to the extent that the effect depends upon the directionality of the tie, it helps exclude the contextual effects. Because the nearby McDonald's doesn't care if I nominate Maggie or she nominates me. We would both gain weight at the same time because of the McDonald's. The direction of our friendship is irrelevant. So this directionality of the understanding of human social interactions and the directionality provides what is known in statistics and in econometrics as an identification strategy. A strategy we can use to identify the causal effect of Maggie's weight gain on me. All right, let me see if I can go back to the slides now, how I have to get there. Let's see. Where's the pointer? Here it is. Share screen. Yes, yes, yes. Presenter view. There we go. And this graphic from the readings shows the percentage increase in an ego's risk of obesity given that an alter becomes obese. And by the way, I can't help but mention this in case it galvanizes more of your interest. About 1 out of 3 times, this paper is on the MCATs. So if you're planning on taking the MCATs, or you're interested in going to medical school, the thing you're learning actually, many of the things you learn in this course, if you're planning on going to medical school, will appear on the MCATs. In fact, often with the exact same readings. So this graphic shows the percentage increase in ego's risk of obesity, given that alter has become obese. So a friend becoming obese increases an ego's risk of being obese. And this holds if ego, so here's a mutual friendship. Oh, let me switch to get my notes on again, my pointer. So here is a mutual friendship. So a mutual friend becoming obese dramatically increases your risk of gaining weight in the subsequent period. An ego perceived friendship has a lesser effect, and an alter perceived friendship doesn't have any at all. We also find a grading depending on whether or not they're concordant sex. So if you're a man, your male friend's gaining weight affects you, but your female friend's gaining weight does not. Ditto, if you're a woman, your female friend's gaining weight affects you, but not if your male friends gain weight. And something similar is seen between same-sex and opposite-sex siblings. If you're a woman, your sister gaining weight affects you, but not your brother, and so on. And we find some effect of spouses and siblings and an effect of coworkers. This was not on the manuscript. We did this analysis subsequent to publication of the paper, but only if your coworker is in a small workplace, so that you might actually, be aware of or see your coworker. And as I said, this directional data is very important because it suggests that confounding by unobserved factors, by contextual factors, is not the source of the relationship. Now, what might be the actual mechanism of the spread? Well, there are a couple of possibilities. One idea is that alters appearance or behavior changes ego's behavior. So here the idea is that you observe your friends gaining weight, and it resets your ideas about what an acceptable body size is. So as you then gain weight, you don't think you're so heavy because your friends all have that same weight. Or an alternative possibility is that alters appearance or behavior changes. That's the second possibility. So one possibility is that alters appearance or behavior changes ego's behavior. For example, your friends say, let's go have muffins and beer, which is a terrible combination, but your friends have suggested that, so you eat muffins and beer, and that makes you gain weight. The second one is the one I was just mentioning, which is that your alters change in appearance or behavior changes your expectations or your perceptions or norms. And there's actually evidence for both of this in our data. Now, when our paper came out in 2007, I think that's right, headline writers had a field day with this. And there was a kind of an interesting international variation in this. In the United States, I think the headline in the New York Times was, "Are you packing it on? Blame your friends." But in England, the headline was, "Are your friends gaining weight? Perhaps you are to blame," which I thought was a hilarious, very British reversal of like the American versus British sort of perspective on the world. Now, I want to be clear that we do not think that our work should justify or could be used to justify any sort of prejudice against people of one or another kind of body size. Anyway, after doing this, we began to explore in my lab all sorts of other phenomena and began to expand the methods we used to understand these ideas. For example, we looked at smoking, something which has been decreasing, not increasing in recent decades. As we saw a few lectures ago, the prevalence of smoking has declined from about 45% to about 20% over the past 4 decades, but nevertheless, over 40 million Americans, adults, are still smokers, and smoking remains the leading preventable cause of death, with over 450,000 deaths annually. So once again, we created these network maps. The dot size is proportional to how many cigarettes you consume every day. Bigger dots are heavier consumers, and we color you yellow if you smoke any cigarettes at all in a given day, greater than 1, greater than 0. Otherwise, you get colored purple or whatever the color is. And here is the, 1971, most of the people are smokers. By 30 years later, many fewer smokers in the network. And actually, if you study the network and you zoom in here, you can see that the smokers seem to occupy particular locations within the network, on the periphery of the network, structurally on the edges of the network. Remember earlier in the course, we talked about how people have different positions within the network. Here, these people are on the edge, on the periphery of the network, not in the center. And analyses similar to those that we did for obesity showed that, again, on average, these clusters of smokers and non-smokers stretched out to 3 degrees of separation. But some additional analyses revealed some interesting findings, which I'm going to ask you about in one moment. The panel on the left looks across time. The exam number is every 4 years, so this is about 28 years of examinations. And on the y-axis is something called the eigenvector centrality, which is how you measure how central a node is in the network. And what we find is that among non-smokers, they retain roughly the same centrality throughout. They're not more or less central or more or less peripheral across time. But among smokers, their centrality declines. They move to the edge of the network. So by the end of the period, smokers are further and further away, more socially marginalized. Now, given the decline in smoking prevalence, so we have decline in smoking prevalence. So that's first finding. Now, another finding is, given the decline in smoking prevalence, we might expect to see the cluster size of smokers decline. Here again on the x-axis is exam number, on the y-axis is the mean smoking cluster size. And what we find is that actually the cluster size of smokers, the kind of average size of groups of people who are smokers who are connected to each other, doesn't change much. And this is very important because if people had been quitting smoking at random within the network, we would have expected the cluster size to decline as the prevalence of smoking declined. So let me see if I can explain what's going on here. It's the difference between, you're lying on a meadow in a summer, and you look up at the heavens, and I tell you that every minute, 5% of the stars are going to blink off and disappear. In one scenario, every minute, 5% of the stars randomly distributed through the networks disappear. In another scenario, every minute, 5% disappear, but in the form of constellations. First, the Sagittarius disappears, then Orion disappears, then Capricorn disappears. So one constellation after another. That is a different pattern. Or for example, imagine that you are at a wedding reception and there are 10 tables of 10 people. And every minute I ring a bell and I say 10% of the room needs to clear out. In one scenario, one person from each table gets up and leaves on average with each bell ringing. So the average table size goes from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 across time. In an alternative scenario, when I ring the bell, everyone from table A gets up and leaves. And then the next minute, everyone from table B gets up and leaves. In that scenario, the average table size always is 10, stays fixed across time, even though 10% of the people are leaving every minute. And it's the latter pattern that we observe with respect to smoking. The mean smoking cluster size stays constant, even though the number of smokers is declining. It's as if whole groups of smokers turn off at once, quit together, like a flock of birds changing direction. So this analysis provides additional evidence for the kind of social contagion, the interpersonal effects that take place within social networks. And like I said before, similar analyses to what we did, like we did with obesity, showed that there's interpersonal effects that go out to about 3 degrees of separation with respect to smoking. Then we began to look at other sorts of phenomena, such as the spread of emotions, like anger or happiness. Human beings, when we have emotions, we show them. Why do we do that? Why do we show our emotions? I wonder if you've ever thought about that. It's not hard, based on evolutionary biology, to provide an account for why it might enhance our fitness to experience emotions, to be capable of fear or anger or happiness even, to provide an evolutionary account for the origin of human emotions, a topic, incidentally, that interested Charles Darwin greatly. But when we have emotions, we don't just feel them, we show them. And we don't just show them, but you can read my emotions. And you don't just read my emotions, but you copy my emotions. It would seem that emotional contagion is a very deep and fundamental part of human emotional experience. And this function of emotions suggests that whatever other advantages they offer, they are also a primitive form of communication. Now, we're accustomed to thinking about emotional contagion as fleeting and involving just a pair of people. So for example, a few years ago, I gave a lecture about this work in New York City. And I said to the audience in New York, I said, you know, when you're on the subway and someone you're sitting in the subway car and someone across the car from you smiles at you and you just instinctively smile back. And they said, we don't do that in New York City. And I said, well, yes, but everywhere else in the world, that's normal human behavior. If someone smiles at you, you smile at them. And of course, emotional contagion can be broader still, such as, you know, punctuated and broad expressions of anger in the form of riots. But we wondered whether emotions might spread beyond pairs of people, and might they do so in a more sustained way than riots? Could there be a kind of a quiet riot, a kind of below the surface emotional stampede? Maybe emotions spread across network ties well beyond pairs and in a more sustained fashion all the time. In fact, maybe emotions have a collective existence and not just an individual existence. So we set out to look at that topic. And this is one of the first images that I think anyone had ever made, mapping networks of human emotions. Every dot's a person. Again, every line is a relationship. The square dots are men. The round dots are women. And now we color the dots according to how happy they are, according to a psychometric scale validated by others. The yellow dots are happy people, the blue dots are sad people, and the green dots are in between. And if you look at this image, once again, you can see clusters of happy and sad people within the network. And these clusters, once again, spread to 3 degrees of separation. Your emotional state is related to the emotional state of people you don't even know, your friends, for example. And similar analyses to those we've done earlier, once again, provided supportive evidence for a role of induction. Furthermore, if you look at this image, you might have the impression that, the blue people are more likely to be on the periphery of the network, and the yellow people occupy more central positions. Actually, when we did this work, my mother had already died by then, but I remember as a teenager arguing with my mother, and actually my co-author, James Fowler, had similar arguments with his mother because we were, of course, both nerds in high school, and we would say to our mothers, if only we had more friends, then we would be happier. And our mothers, as it turns out, said to both of us, if you were happier, you would have more friends. And something like 20 years later, James and I were finally in a position to actually mathematically study this topic and decide which comes first, being happy or having more friends. And it turns out on this rare occasion, our mothers were wrong and we were right. Actually, people with more friends tend to become happier across time. Now, all the stuff that I've shown you so far uses observational data. So it's not an experiment. And it's very difficult to be certain what's happening in these observational situations. So what we really want to do is an experiment. So to get around some of the potential problems with drawing conclusions from observational networks, and also to begin to deepen our understanding of the possible evolutionary significance of social networks, a set of ideas that had been prompted in us by our exploration of the role of networks in emotions, we began over 10 years ago now to do experiments, creating artificial networks to study. So let me show you how this experiment works. College students who were strangers to each other were brought into a laboratory and were given real money with which to play something known as a public goods game. They were randomly formed into groups of 4 people, and they were told if you gave $1 to the collective, we, the investigators, will double that dollar to make it $2 and divide it amongst the 4 of you. So each of you would get 50 cents if you contributed $1. Now, of course, you contribute $1, you only get back 50 cents. So you've paid a price to benefit the group. You've acted altruistically. But the group has benefited more than twice as much as your donation. From the point of view of the group, the best thing, this is called a public goods game. From the point of view of the group, of course, the best thing is for everyone to contribute maximally at every round of the game, because they're going to play a sequence of these games. But from the point of view of an individual, the best thing to do selfishly is to give nothing and hope that other people contribute maximally. Of course, if people start behaving that way, maybe others will observe them and they'll also stop behaving that way. People can see what other people are doing in this situation. So what we did in this experiment is we formed these groups, and then they would play a round of the game, and then a bell would ring and they'd be randomly assigned to new people, and then a bell would ring and then be randomly assigned to new people. And with this process, we were able to create artificial linear networks. And we were able to assess not if I am nice to Maggie, is Maggie then nice to me? That would be direct reciprocity. Nor were we interested in if I am nice to Maggie, does Maggie nice to the next person? A kind of indirect reciprocity. I'm sorry, if I'm nice to Maggie, is someone else nice to Maggie because, if there's direct reciprocity, I'm nice to Maggie and she reciprocates. There's indirect reciprocity, I'm nice to Maggie, and then you, someone else, sees that I've been nice to Maggie and you are nice to me, either because you want to reward me for being nice to Maggie, or because now you've seen I'm a nice kind of guy, so you think I might reciprocate to you. Those are both difficult topics which had been studied for a long time by other scientists. No, we were interested in, if I am nice to Maggie, does Maggie go on to be nice to Susie? A kind of network reciprocity, a cascade effect through the network. And that is, in fact, exactly what we were able to find. We were able to find that if Eleni is nice to Lucas in period 1, Lucas is nice to Erica in period 2, Erica is kind to Jay in period 3, and Jay is kind to Brecken in period 4. And this is one of the most bizarre results to come out of my laboratory in the last 15 years. What I've just told you is that how Jay treats Brecken depends on how Eleni treats Lucas, even though neither Jay nor Brecken ever saw or interacted with either Eleni or Lucas. Here shown experimentally, so it's not due to homophily or to context. This is induction. This is social contagion shown experimentally of altruistic behavior, and it's spread to 3 degrees of separation. This 3 degrees of separation, this geodesic spread of altruism in this experiment is distinct from the temporal persistence, so that if Eleni is kind to Lucas in period 1, Lucas learns to be kind and is kind to Erica in period 2 and Lysander in period 3 and Bemi in period 4 and so on. In fact, if you fold back all the extra kindness, for every extra dollar that Eleni gives to Lucas, the network functions as a kind of matching grant, doubling the downstream benefit of that altruistic act. So pay it forward is real. So things spread in networks, and this has been shown for a variety of non-obvious phenomena. I've shown you a little bit of evidence, and you've read some, about obesity and smoking, but also it obtains for drinking and drug use behavior. I showed a little bit of evidence for happiness, but also it obtains for loneliness and depression. And I showed you a little bit of evidence for altruism, but it also obtains for crime and voting and tastes than ideas. And these things usually spread typically to about 3 degrees of separation, although this is just a rule of thumb. And I should emphasize that not everything spreads, and not everything spreads by the same mechanism. So germs are different than ideas, which are different than norms, which are different than behaviors, which are different than money. All of those things spread, but they spread by different mechanisms. And both good and bad things can spread. So it's not just about good things spreading. And the key idea about networks is that networks magnify whatever they are seeded with. Networks magnify whatever they are seeded with. They are agnostic. Networks will magnify fascism and racism and Ebola and sadness and violence and misinformation and anti-vax sentiments. But networks will also magnify love and happiness and kindness and altruism and ideas. But the networks must be seeded. There must be an external force. There has to be a hand dropping rocks before you get these ripple effects. The ripples do not appear, with certain exceptions, spontaneously on the surface. This voting paper was a very nice paper done by my colleague James Fowler. He did a randomized controlled experiment using 61 million people in Facebook, where he was able to show that voting behavior cascades and ripples out beyond 2 degrees of separation on a vast scale using an experimental approach. And my laboratory since then has done many experiments showing the kinds of things, and I'll return to this in a few ideas, a few illustrations of this in the coming lectures. This paper, taken from your readings, illustrates the impact in networks of criminal behavior. They used police records to identify pairs of people who were arrested for co-offending. Now, to engage in a crime together is a very special kind of relationship, you know? And if you're arrested, you and your buddy are arrested while committing a crime, you know, it's sort of like maybe you're not friends, I won't say that necessarily, but you're definitely social intimates. You know, you're together engaged in this criminal activity. That will define the network ties. So they created a network of people engaged in co-offending, drawn from a population of 82,000 residents in a particular Chicago district over a 5-year period. And the resulting network had 24,000 people in it and over 30% of the community's population. And 8,222 of these people had a co-offending tie with at least one other person in the network. And the social distance measure here they found that a social distance in this network was negatively associated with victimization. Just like the obesity study, we look at degrees of separation from someone who was murdered. Are you 1 degree removed from someone who was murdered, 2 degrees removed, 3, 4, 5 degrees removed, and so on from a person who was murdered? And then we ask, what's your probability of being murdered in the follow-up period? And what they found was a tremendous excess risk of being murdered the closer you are, not so much geographically, but the closer you are geodesically to a murder victim. And this graph plots the predicted probabilities against the mean geodesic distance to a homicide distance, to a homicide victim. And the effect is more pronounced the closer one is to a victim and diminishes quickly beyond 3 degrees of separation. Yet another similar pattern using a dissimilar data set and a dissimilar outcome in the hands of a completely different group of investigators. Well, many people ask, what might explain why 3 degrees? And this is hard, but there are at least 3 possible explanations. One that you've probably intuited already is that it's simple decay. You know, if you drop a pebble in a pond or in the ocean, it doesn't create waves that encircle the planet, right? The waves go out for a certain distance and then they dissipate, they decay. And if you studied physics, you know that what happens is the energy from dropping the rock initially creates the waves, but then that energy is dissipated in the form of heat. That actually the water, the ocean warms up a little bit when you drop a pebble in it. The whole of the ocean warms up when you drop a pebble in it, because the energy from the rock, the potential energy, gets converted to kinetic energy, which then gets converted into heat when the rock hits the surface. Or if you don't like the physics metaphors, just remember the children's game of telephone that many of you probably played when you were little, and the decay and the fidelity of information as one child whispers to the next child whatever it is that the word is. So that's decay. So one idea is that there's a limit to how far things can spread at around 3 degrees of separation, which reflects fundamental processes of social friction and the decay in transmission fidelity. That's one idea. Another idea, which I do think plays a bit of a role, I think all 3 of these actually play a role, but it's hard to find evidence for them. Although there is increasing evidence for all 3 over the last 10 years, is what I call the network instability idea. So here the idea is that at any given time step, any given tie has a certain probability of stopping. So your best friends, the average duration of an adult's best friend is about 10 years. So best friendships sometimes last a lifetime, but on average, your most intimate friend today, in about 10 years, you'll have a different most intimate friend. So on any given time step, over any given year, you're likely to break the ties. Or divorces, marriages don't last forever. You're possible to divorce. Or someone could die in the network. So one of these people could die and drop out. So the idea is that at 1 degree of separation, there's a lot of stability in your network. So the people who are there today are the people who will be there tomorrow or next year. But it's somewhat less so at 2 degrees of separation, because at 2 degrees of separation, a lot more could go wrong. One or either of these ties could break, and this person would lose connection to this person. Or either of these 2 people could die, and this person would lose connection to that person. And at 3 degrees of separation, even more so. So the idea with the network instability argument is that this person gains weight, let's say, and they start transmitting the ripple, but by the time it gets to this person, those are totally different people. It's a little bit, if you want to borrow a chemistry metaphor, a little bit like the electron shells, the SDF shells. The shells closest to the nucleus are very tight. And then as you move further from the nucleus, they get fuzzier and fuzzier. They're harder to know where those electrons will be, according to quantum mechanics, as you move further and further away from the nucleus in the center of an atom. So the idea is that we are all surrounded by social shells, and the shells nearest to us are stable from moment to moment, but further and further away are less and less stable. So, so if you decide to send a message to your friend's friend's friend, it might never get there, because that The people who are your friends, 3 time step from now are not the people who are your friends when you started transmitting. That's the network instability argument. And the last argument is the evolutionary origins argument. Here the idea is that when we evolved to live in groups, and our brains evolved the capacity to communicate within groups where nobody was more than 3 degrees removed from you. Everyone was actually typically within geodesic distance 2. If you look at hunter-gatherer bands, everyone is either your friend or your friend's friend. There really aren't friends of friends of friends of friends in hunter-gatherer bands, or in small villages like the kind Maggie and I study in Honduras. So here the idea is that evolution equipped us only with the capacity to send signals that could get as far as 3 degrees, or to detect signals that come from as far away as 3 degrees. Why should you be able to detect the fidelity of rumors that originate more than 4 degrees away from you if in our ancestral past, no rumors ever originated more than 4 degrees away from you? So this is another very subtle idea. And there's actually, believe it or not, some evidence for this that's been that has appeared in the last decade or so. Okay, let me close with this and we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. This perspective on humans and social systems has a number of implications. First of all, we gain insight into how the whole comes to be greater than the sum of its parts. It's the ties that make the difference between groups and networks. The ties add value, and they lie at the root of emergence, the emergence of new properties within social systems. Second, it also means that there can be new kinds of hierarchy in social systems that we've not previously paid much attention to in this class, or that you may not have previously paid much attention to. So we're so focused on, for example, wealth and race, perhaps, or other kinds of measures of social hierarchy. But maybe what we really should be focused on is where you are in the network and how that affects your relative standing. And what groups are people members of? And are they central or peripheral in the network? And so on. Third, this network perspective sheds light on the importance of free will. Now, many people have looked at the work that my group and other groups around the nation are doing in network science, and they're very troubled by this work on philosophical grounds. Because what I've shown you today is that things that are maybe very deeply personal to you, like your body size, or your emotional state, or your kindness to others, or who you vote for, may depend not on your own individual choices and actions, but on the choices and actions of other people around you, maybe even people you don't even know. This finding would seem to deliver a whack to free will, suggesting you do not have as much free will as you thought. And that's true. But it's also true that these findings elevate free will, because they show that when you make changes in your life, when you quit smoking, when you act beneficently to others, just like the Buddhist monks have always taught, when you act in this way, you affect not just those immediately around you, but you can create positive ripples in social networks that can affect dozens, sometimes hundreds or thousands of other people because of your actions. And last, I think this perspective sheds light on social networks and goodness, because overall, we form social networks because the benefits of a connected life outweigh the costs. If I was always violent towards you, or gave you bad germs, or gave you wrong information, or made you sad, you would cut the ties to me and the network would disintegrate. Therefore, the spread of good things is required for networks to endure. The spread of kindness and ideas and so on. And in turn, the network is required for good things like love and altruism and happiness and ideas to spread. So if we realized how valuable social networks are and what they are doing for us and what they can do, I think we'd be the better for it. Because in fact, I think social networks are required for goodness to flourish. Okay, that's what I have for you today. Are there any questions before I let you go? Yes, David. David.
Oh, I see Ivan has a question.
David, I thought, okay, Iman, yeah,
I'm all good, thanks though.
okay.
Can there be dominant and recessive traits in social interactions? Like if there were a cluster of not obese people and a cluster of obese people and they collided, which trait would end up dominating?
That is an excellent question. And so if there are waves of obesity, weight gain, and weight loss propagating through the network, and there are, which one wins? It depends on forces outside the network. What is the primary motive force? So if you have an obesogenic environment, remember, networks don't give rise to the phenomenon. They just magnify whatever they are seeded with. So what the networks are doing is jump-starting both. So if the primary forces of militating towards weight gain are stronger than the primary forces of militating towards weight loss, and they are, the network will preferentially magnify the obesity. It'll magnify both, but it'll magnify them both to a maybe unequal extent, actually. And so it just gives rise to more and more obesity. Did I answer your question?
I think I see where you're going with it. Yeah.
Yes. And you can actually quantify what would happen, and I don't discuss that in the paper, and it's actually not an easy thing to quantify. What would happen if you had two friends who were gaining weight and two friends who were losing weight, for example? What would you do? And probably you would gain weight in that situation because it's actually easier to gain, fundamentally easier to gain weight than to lose weight. But that's another whole topic.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, are you learning anything? But you don't have any questions for me. How do I know if you're learning if you don't have any questions? You're nodding, so that's good. I'm getting some feedback. I can tell. I think I've told you guys already that in a classroom setting, it's so different because I can look out at your faces and I can tell if you're learning or if you understand what I'm saying. Anyone else have anything to ask? Okay, I'll see you on Thursday.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.